Hi everyone, welcome to another My Life in Objects. So this book might not be to everyone's taste. I know there's a number of people that watch the channel that are interested in some of the programming books I have, but this is a little bit more niche. It is a programming book, but it's through more of a cultural lens, and I bought it really to act as a trying to think of the best word here, but almost like a counter view, or not a counter view, but a different way of looking at programming language than through the programming language exploration lens, like the comparative programming in terms of how programs are structured, and to take a look at it from more of a programming culture, language cultures, as is the name of the book here. So I picked this up fairly recently. Now, my sort of interest in the sort of in looking at technology through more of a cultural lens has come from a number of different angles. Probably first started when I was doing my postgrad studies, and one of the units I did was called Implementing New Technologies, but it was actually taught through the social sciences department within the Open University rather than the technology department, as was the case with all of the other courses that were on offer that you could pick as part of the postgraduate diploma that I was doing. So I suppose that's where that started, and that's when I got more interested. And then sometime in the 2000s, so that was the mid to late 90s, I think, and then sometime in the sort of mid to late 2000s, I picked up this book. Now, this book had been kicking around, I think, since about 2003, but this version of it is the 2006 version, and it's called Japanese Cybercultures. So yeah, it was just again looking at a technology, particularly internet cybercultures, through slightly different lens. So yeah, that's where this has been bubbling away in the background. So it was inevitable, I suppose, when I started to revisit comparative programming languages, to pick up this sort of book. So looking at programming languages through a cultural lens. Interesting treatment. So it sits, I think this particular book sits somewhere between like a sociology book and a philosophy book. So yeah, there's a chapter on, so chapter 1 is sort of, I suppose, setting out the stall to some degree. So computing, translation, automation, and looks at a sort of relationship between, coding and when you're sort of examining programming languages comparatively, do you treat them like examining languages generally, and why or would you not do that, and the sort of arguments for and against. It's a section on comments in coding, a section on naming variables, and then it talks about Snowball, and then JavaScript. So it just basically picks two languages and pulls them apart from a cultural standpoint in terms of their development and when they were developed, those sort of things. So it's a pretty interesting take. And then so I'm sort of working my way through. It's a hard book to read, so I find that I have to sort of just read it in bite-sized chunks. So I generally try and read like a section every so often and like meditate on it to some degree. So it's very much like a philosophy book in that respect, and just think about how that might apply. And with these, what I tend to do is I don't try and argue against them. I think, okay, well, let me give the author the benefit of charity and assume that it's correct. Like, if it was correct, like, what implication would that have? And then do it that way. And then at the end, I might come through and by doing that, realise that actually that idea doesn't float. But yeah, that's basically how I do it. I don't try and argue it from the get-go. I sort of take a more position, like I say, of a charitable approach, and then see, okay, if I work my way through this argument, where does the argument start to sort of fall apart just naturally? And then the final chapter here is something called DevOps Fiction, which I have no idea what that's about. Actually, I've not really got round to, I haven't got round to reading that. And I didn't do the usual thing of, maybe flicking through and, reading the last sentence, or sorry, the last paragraph in the first paragraph. I just wanted to sort of digest this chronologically. You can see at the end there's quite a number of notes here as well, and a pretty extensive bibliography which I've yet to try and work my way through. I think the book came out, when was it? I can't remember if this is a recent book or not. I don't even remember how I stumbled across it. I think I was just genuinely intrigued to if there was any programming books that would look at things through a more of a, like I say, a sociology and philosophy. Oh yeah, 2024. So I must have been specifically looking at very recent books. I thought there's some pretty interesting old school. There's a pretty interesting old school diagram. It's mostly verbiage here through it. But if that sort of interesting fascinates you, like I said, it is the sort of book where you literally have to work through a section at a time and then really sort of mull and think over firstly what the point is that the author's making, but also what, with that argument, what implications does that have generally, and also obviously what new things does it teach you about the differences between languages and the difference between aspects of the language. I did find the discussion in there about the choice of generic variables, and how people pick sort of certain variable names when they're they're writing out training materials or whatever. I just did find that actually quite fascinating, although it doesn't in itself sound maybe that fascinating to a lot of people. I'd actually got quite a lot out of that chapter. So there we have it. If you're interested in reading a book that's quite a bit different, and you want to spend a number of months really sort of dissecting programming languages from a cultural perspective, automating automation actually is and it did actually make me think quite deeply about underneath it all, what is programming all about, and getting into this position of and it does talk about it at some point about with programming, when do you get to the point where the programming language is creating code? So so it's one thing to automate a process, and then it's quite something else to actually automate automation itself. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and also with relevance to the current situation we're in with large language models and AI and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.